looking for,
Sure.
no disrespect.
No, not at all.
A straight answer.
Absolutely.
I kind of like, I like two things,
listen.
breakfast food and straight answers.
I love them.
And
Well,
if a robot is feeding me information and I don't know it's a robot, am I entitled to know it's a robot as a consumer? Pretty straight up.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Mr. Daly, am I saying your name correctly, sir?
That's correct.
Yes. Mr. Daly, if I am a recipient of content created by generative AI, do you think I should have a right to know that content was generated by a robot?
Yes, I think you do. I think the details would depend on the context, but in most cases, I think,
Okay.
I or anybody else, if I receive something, I'd like to know, is this real or was this generated?
Mr. Smith?
Generally, yes. What I would say is if you're listening to an audio, if you're watching a video, if you're seeing an image and it was generated by AI, I think people have a right to know. The one area where I think there's a nuance is if you're using AI to, say, help you write something. Maybe it's helping you write the first draft. Just as I don't think any of us would say that when our staff helps us write something, we're obliged to give the speech and say, now I'm going to read the paragraph that my staff wrote. You make it your own. And I think the written word is a little more complex, and we need to think that through. But as a broad principle, I agree with that principle.
Professor?
there are situations where you probably wouldn't expect to be dealing with the product of generative AI, and in those instances,
Well, that's the problem.
right. But as times change, it's possible that our expectations change, and so.
But as a principle, do you think that people should have a right to know when they're being fed content from generative AI?
I tell my students it depends on the context. Generally speaking, if you're vulnerable to generative AI, then the answer is absolutely yes.
What do you mean if you're vulnerable?
So there may be
I'm
situations.
just looking for,
Sure.
no disrespect.
No, not at all.
A straight answer.
Absolutely.
I kind of like, I like two things,
listen.
breakfast food and straight answers.
I love them.
And
Well,
if a robot is feeding me information and I don't know it's a robot, am I entitled to know it's a robot as a consumer? Pretty straight up.
yeah, I think the answer is yes.
All right.
In a lot of
Start back with Mr. Dowley. Am I entitled to know who owns that robot and where that content came from? I know it came from a robot, but somebody had to goose the robot to make it give me that content. Am I entitled as a consumer to know who owns the robot?
I think that's a harder question that depends on the particular context. I think, if somebody is feeding me a video and it's been identified as being generated by AI, I now know that it's generated, it's not real. If it's being used, for example, in a political campaign, then I would want to know who
But let me stop you.
informed it.
Let's suppose I'm looking at a video and it was generated by a robot. Would it make any difference to you whether that robot was owned by, let's say, President Biden or President Trump? Don't you want to know in evaluating the content who owns the robot and who prompted it to give you this information?
I would probably want to know that. I don't know that I would feel it would be required for me to know that.
How about you, Mr. Smith?
I'm generally a believer in letting people know not only that it's generated by a computer, but who owns the program that's doing it. The only qualification I would offer, and it's something you all should think about and would know better than me, there are certain areas in political speech where one has to decide whether you want people to act with anonymity. The Federalist Papers were first published under a pseudonym. And I think in the world today, I'd rather have everybody know who's speaking. But you should think about it.
Professor?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you again, Senator, with a not straight answer, but I agree.
How do you feel about breakfast food?
Right. I am pro breakfast food.
Okay.
So we agree on that. I agree with Mr. Smith. I think that there are circumstances where you'd want to preserve anonymous speech, and there are some where you absolutely would want to know who.
Okay. Well, I'm not. I don't want to go too over. Obviously, this is an important subject, and the extent to which I think, let me rephrase that, the extent of most senators' knowledge in terms of the nuances of AI. Their general impression is that AI has extraordinary potential to make our lives better if it doesn't make our lives worse first. And that's about the extent of it. In my judgment, we're not nearly ready to be able to craft a bill that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. I think we're more likely to take baby steps. And I ask you those questions, predictably, because Senator Schatz and I have a bill. It's very simple.
It was a moment of rare clarity and perhaps unintended poetry in the crowded halls of Congress. Senator John Kennedy leaned forward, his tone plain-spoken, his words stripped of pretense. I kind of like two things, breakfast food and straight answers. The hearing room broke its usual rhythm of rehearsed responses and procedural politeness. For an instant, America's unease with artificial intelligence and with the way truth itself is being reshaped had a human face. Before him sat industry executives and scholars, each cautious, each wrapped in the familiar armor of nuance and context. They spoke of complexity, of dependence on circumstances, of the evolving expectations of consumers. But Kennedy wasn't asking for a thesis. He was asking a moral question, one that cuts to the heart of modern democracy. If a robot is speaking to me, am I not entitled to know? His question hung in the air, not as policy, but as principle. In an age when voices can be cloned, when faces can be manufactured, and when entire narratives can be forged by machines without a human fingerprint, Kennedy's inquiry carried an old American cadence. Who is accountable for what we see, hear, and believe? Mr. Daly answered first, hesitant but sincere. Yes, people should know when content is generated by AI. Microsoft's Brad Smith agreed in principle, warning that disclosure should accompany anything that looks, sounds, or feels real. Yet both men hesitated when Kennedy pushed further. Am I entitled to know who owns that robot? That question, more than any other, seemed to reach the limit of comfort in the room, because behind every algorithm there is ownership. Behind every synthetic voice there is intent, and behind every illusion there is someone deciding who gets deceived. Kennedy's insistence was not just about transparency, it was about truth. A truth that is no longer guaranteed by evidence, but mediated by code. The witnesses, in their polished restraint, spoke of context and balance, of preserving anonymity, invoking even the Federalist Papers, written, as Mr. Smith reminded the chamber, under a pseudonym. But Kennedy saw through the analogy. The authors of those papers were men, accountable to conscience and consequence. A robot has neither. The senator's Louisiana drawl, disarming yet unyielding, became the moral compass of the hearing. He wasn't chasing a soundbite. He was articulating a fear buried deep in the American psyche, that soon we won't know what's real anymore. When he said, AI has extraordinary potential to make our lives better, if it doesn't make our lives worse first, he spoke not just as a legislator, but as a sentinel. Because the line between innovation and manipulation has never been thinner. In that admission that Congress is not ready, that lawmakers are playing catch-up to an intelligence without empathy, lay the quiet confession of a government confronting something it can barely define, much less regulate. This was more than a hearing on technology. It was a confrontation with power, invisible, algorithmic power, and with our willingness to surrender judgment to convenience. The men and women in that room weren't merely debating disclosure laws. They were standing at the threshold of a new social contract, one where machines can persuade, influence, even deceive, while the human spirit, the moral anchor of the republic, risks dissolving into data. Kennedy's hypothetical, would it make any difference whether the robot was owned by President Biden or President Trump, was not partisan theater. It was a test of conscience, because ownership defines motive, and in politics, as in life, motive defines truth. A manipulated image or AI-generated voice could tilt an election, destroy a reputation, ignite a movement, all without accountability. The senator's point was simple. Democracy cannot function in shadows cast by artificial light. What we witnessed in that exchange was not just a senator pressing witnesses. It was a glimpse of the moral vacuum technology threatens to create. Machines may simulate speech, but they cannot bear responsibility. They may imitate empathy, but they cannot feel remorse. And in a system already strained by distrust, every synthetic word risks eroding what little faith remains in the institutions meant to protect the public. Kennedy closed not with flourish, but with a warning disguised as humility. "We're not ready," he said. "We'll take baby steps." In that confession lies the unsettling truth. While the architects of AI move at the speed of light, the stewards of law move at the pace of caution. But democracy cannot afford delay when truth itself is under siege. This hearing, modest as it may have seemed, exposed the fault line of the 21st century between human accountability and artificial persuasion, between those who create systems that shape minds and those sworn to defend the minds they shape. The senator's questions were not about breakfast food. They were about faith. Faith in what we see, what we read, and what we believe. If we lose that, no law, no innovation, no algorithm can bring it back. Because when we no longer know who's speaking, we risk forgetting who we are. And so, as the hearing adjourned, and the microphones clicked off, the question lingered, not in the marble halls of the Capitol, but in the conscience of every viewer. Who owns the truth in the age of machines? The answer will define the future of our republic. This is Liberty Congress of USA. Because the fight for truth, the real human truth, has only just begun. Subscribe and stand with us.